Thank you very much for having me, and for it's wonderful to be here in Ankara. I've been to Turkey 5 times, but this is my first visit to Ankara, so right and appropriate that we do this here at TEPAV. So, and I also want to thank you for letting me speak in English. I think that more British and American people should acknowledge the fact that they come to your country and they don't speak your language. But I want to thank you very much for having me here. I'm going to spend some time talking a little bit about the work that we're doing in this field, which is appropriate for me. I'm an economist by training, but my real passion has been an entrepreneur. I've had 2 startups, I've had 2 exits, and I dedicate my time now to building startup communities and entrepreneurial ecosystems in all of the countries that we operate in, 140 countries. And we're quite deliberate about where we go during Global Entrepreneurship Week, both myself and my board members. We have a lot of confidence in the future here in Turkey. And so, as I said before, this is not my first visit to Turkey, and I know it won't be my last to learn more about what we're doing here. But let me first of all give you a little bit of context. Since we are in the beginning of Global Entrepreneurship Week, I just want to tell you a little bit about what it is. It is essentially two primary things. The first is that it's the scale. This is about putting on competitions, events, activities, and conferences, mentoring sessions, networking sessions in all of these countries where we're trying to celebrate the entrepreneur, but we're also trying to put entrepreneurs more at the center of the economic development of their countries. And so we have a lot of fun with this. So we have as you can imagine, but we also have some sober work to do in trying to better draw a correlation between entrepreneurs and the impact they have on their economies. And one of the essential things we do year-round at Global Entrepreneurship Week and at the Kauffman Foundation is that we're spending a lot of our time trying to assist in the creation of healthier entrepreneurship ecosystems in each of those countries, whether that be national or whether that be local. And by having something as simple as a celebration of events and activities, it allows us to bring together what I call the old and the new players in the entrepreneurial ecosystem. So we have all the kind of serious thinkers in the space. We have the chambers of commerce. We have the academic institutions, and obviously the universities. But we also have these vibrant, new, very overconfident communities of young people who are birthing new companies constantly along the way. And so we essentially with GW, what's happening this week is that we try to find a way to allow them to come together under one platform. And you can read more about it if you want to go to our website, but we have a whole range of different projects that occur in almost all of the countries, so that we make this a global project as opposed to a series of national projects. And I can tell you more about those if anybody's interested. Or you can visit our, you can visit our website on gw.co. But what I wanted to do today is spend most of our time, if we can, talking obviously about our topic for today in terms of entrepreneurship policy. But before I do, I think it's really important that we set a little bit of context as to the world that we're trying to foster and generate more attention to in the culture and the communities we're trying to focus on. You know, as I travel from country to country, I see the real economic energy in the hands of a new generation of individuals who are very different to the people that I was with when I started my first company at 19 years old. First of all, I don't think they're social entrepreneurs, but they are socially motivated for-profit entrepreneurs, but they are much more generous and much less greedy than their predecessors. They exist in an environment where they're just as interested in other people in their startup community, in their village, succeeding as much as themselves. And they certainly view their role as being one of a generation that was hardwired automatically to be networked and connected to each other. They view national boundaries as being porous to innovation, and they certainly look at entrepreneurship not in a narrow commercial context, but they look at entrepreneurship as the art of the possible, the possibility of human endeavor for the benefit of all. So you have these major change makers in societies, and I can tell you I see this in villages in Africa, I see it in Nairobi, I see it in Moscow, I see it in almost every country of the world. They're bottom-up movements that really didn't need much from government or from institutions. In fact, I participated in a meeting at the White House in Washington the other day where we had presidents of research universities sitting alongside people that had graduated from those universities and had created companies within the last 3 years. And every one of those graduates said, I have to tell you something that's very hard for us to tell you because we respect you as university presidents, but you need us more than we need you. This is a generation that doesn't wait for institutions and is not expecting, I think, either government or academic institutions to be the leaders of leading them into the environments that they want to go into. They are going to create that themselves. The question is, and the question before us today in our policy discussions is going to be around how do we make it, how are we smarter at making it easier for them to do what they do best? A couple of very quick trends about this community. Again, this is not economic policy, but this is research. We are viewing entrepreneurship as a science. This field has been populated by, or has been dominated, I think, by a lack of robust research in the past. But we're trying to study what it is that's actually working. And here are a couple of highlights. These are not necessarily new things to you, but what is new is that we see this in every kind of startup community. It doesn't matter if it's a top-down dominated economy that's dominated by a strong government. It doesn't matter if it is if it's an entrepreneurial economy or if it's any other kind of economic and political system. We see, first of all, that this economic force comes about because they are forming teams. There are teams of old people and young people. You might be interested to know that the average age of a US-born tech entrepreneur as of last year is 39 years old. It's not 22 years old. It's not a young kid in a garage. The reason for that is that they form teams, and the teams usually have of co-founders. You have speakers come to your podium who say, I'm the founder of a company. Usually they are actually the co-founder. There were like 3 or 4 or 5 of them. And it's because there's usually an older person with unique knowledge of the industry who got together with a young disruptor, and they created an innovation that became a company. So the other thing you see dominating this world is networks. It's truly network. It's not about access to capital anymore. It's not about venture capital. It's not even about angel investors. It's about having the right networks that connect you to the right people that will bring that talent. I get turned down more than I get accepted when I ask to invest in companies, because often I'll see something which is a very, very strong idea and a strong team, but they are looking for people. The really strongest investment opportunities are people that know that the first thing they need to do is work out, is the person that's going to give them money going to bring them a very useful network of people that it's going to help them in their particular industry. But networks is, at the end of the day, the big asset that the unemployed youth of today have. It's a lot easier as a young person. We complain about the high rates of unemployment, and I have a whole separate talk I love to give to young unemployed people and tell them that I'm the sort of the unpopular one that stands at the front and says, you have no excuses. because the world for a young entrepreneur is a lot easier now than it was 10 years ago. There are very many roadblocks have been removed. And if you have time, which is something that you often have as an unemployed person, you have the ability to do so many things that you couldn't do before because you also needed money, or you needed pedigree, or a good family, or you needed a prestigious university education, or you needed something like that. You don't need that anymore. You can get access to whatever you want. You can look at the online courses being put out by all of the major universities of the world now, and you can realize that you can get free access to this most extraordinary, not just information, but network and ability to have people help you analyze it. The other couple of things is, I'm just going to say this once because this is the big myth in entrepreneurship. It's entrepreneurs that create venture capital. Venture capital doesn't create entrepreneurs. This is the big thing that people focus on. They say the big reason why entrepreneurs aren't succeeding is they need more money, they need money, they need money. Money actually is not necessarily the friend of an early stage startup. What they need is to focus on the iterative process, the repetitive process of testing their formula, taking that data, putting that data back into the formula, trying it again and again and again, so that every time they test that formula with a prospective customer, it works. And not until they've actually done that testing and that valuable processing and started to test and start to get customers, should they be really going for outside capital. So the really successful startups, less than 1% of new firms in the United States take venture capital. And yet everyone would think that it's a big sign of success that people get out there and get their round of venture capital. So we're very keen to get that message across, that it's really about getting the idea straight. A couple of other quick things that I won't go into in detail, but we can do in the discussion if anybody's interested, is that there is clearly a movement away from any formal classroom education as far as broader trends are concerned, and towards experiential learning, whether this be virtual, but usually the experiential learning is driven around initiatives such as Startup Weekend or boot camps or hackathons, or but a variety of other methodologies. But certainly that's the other thing is that while tech entrepreneurs have been mostly successful in creating the culture in these communities that has opened the minds of a lot more citizens into joining the entrepreneurial environment, at the end of the day, there is new movements into other fields, into what we call the producer movement or the maker movement. So we've got more and more entrepreneurs joining the field from other areas apart from business schools. At the Kauffman Foundation, we actually took all our money out of business schools, and we invested in universities that put the entrepreneurship curriculum in every discipline on campus. And part of the reason for that was we realized it was less than 2 out of 10, 1 out of 5 entrepreneurs that had ever had any experience in a business school. So this is usually the interesting the interesting dynamic. That's what's changed for this kind of startup culture and this type of startup communities, is that we've now got a new set of energy from government in understanding startups and the startup policies. And let me tell you what happened to us in Washington, D.C. We had a hard time having a conversation with the United States government about new and young firm formation. And President Obama, when he became president, we asked him if he would give us access to data that previously we'd not had access to. And we got into the Bureau of Labor Statistics and showed that all of the net new jobs over the past 25 years had come from firms less than 5 years old. So let me tell you that again. All of the net new jobs had come from firms less than 5 years old. And that was an interesting, a dramatic data point for us, because what that did is it told us that we've been concentrating not we've been concentrating too much on the distinction between large and small companies and not new and old companies. And so we woke up one night, we realized our problem here was actually one of language. We've been talking about entrepreneurs, and when we started talking about startups, it changed overnight. Washington suddenly woke up and said, oh, well, maybe we should be thinking about this differently to how we think about our assistance programs for small business. And I had the great privilege last night of meeting your Deputy Prime Minister, and we spent 30 minutes talking. And one of the things that was clear to me is that, like President Obama, and the very few people in leadership positions who've recognized this, it's quite clear to him that there is a very different set of strategies that you deploy if you're going to focus on creating new and young firms, whether it be for job creation, or whether it be for simply unleashing innovation, or whether it be because you're thinking that it's a primary way of building economies, or even if you think it's the most important way of keeping your larger companies competitive. The reality is that what we have dedicated our work now to is on this first 5 years of operation. It's around how do we make it easier for new firms to start and scale that are high growth and high impact in those first 5 years of operation. They provide the greatest potential and they're the most potent, they're the most valuable to the economy, they're the most valuable to innovation. And so we had a very interesting conversation in Washington because we realized, and literally we had this conversation with the president himself. And the reason for this was because there was nobody else in his administration that would support this. This was just a few years ago. So I'm saying even in Washington, D.C., in the nation's capital of a country that people think understand entrepreneurship and high-growth entrepreneurship, we didn't get it at all. I mean, in fact, we had huge resistance. So the startup policies discussions that occur in the U.S. government occur in the White House. They don't occur in the Department of Commerce. They don't occur in the Small Business Administration. It is a conversation that occurs in the Office of Science and Technology Policy, not just because there's a lot of technology entrepreneurs, but because there is a challenge in that some people don't want us to distinguish between small business and entrepreneurs. So from a policy perspective, it's been a fairly radical change in Washington. Well, then that for us opened up an interesting dynamic, and I don't think it's because of Washington that it happened here in Turkey, but now we have a whole array of nations all over the world that are suddenly asking themselves this question: where are jobs coming from? What are our rates of new firm formation? What are the primary, what data do we have and what data don't we have, and what should we be measuring? And this has become vital because what's happened in the entrepreneurship world is that it's not been populated in the past by prominent academics and researchers. You've ended up with people who've come from other fields, or it's not had the prime attention that it should have. And so as we now get more and more serious economists and thinkers in the space, we're starting to see a much more robust and data-driven effort to build public policies. And it's obviously in that context that we're having our discussion today. And so you'll see, and I won't go through all this data right now, but what's happened is we now counted that there's around 71, in fact the White House asked us to put together an analysis of all of the different efforts around the world to do comparative studies on how countries are performing in terms of their entrepreneurial capacity. Well, I'm going to tell you a little bit about the middle, but I'm going to start at the beginning of that challenge, and I'm going to tell you at the end that the biggest message, and if there's one thing you walk away from today, it's the fact that we discovered that we just don't know. The data is so bad, there's such a paucity of data that we've got an enormous amount of work to do if we want to shift to an attention of understanding new firm formation and its impact on our individual economies, and what are the reasons that firms don't, the real reasons that firms don't form. We have a lot of work to do. But of course there is work being done. There's, obviously the World Bank's Doing Business study is perhaps the best and the most effective global research tool that is out there. but we have a whole range of them. But when we put them together, I'll come back to this, but when we put them together, we discovered that, there were too many outliers. There were too many reasons. I mean, there were a couple of countries where, and just to explain, what this chart is, obviously these are individual examples of studies. Now, we actually had 71 studies, but there were only this number of them that had the same, that were measuring, that had similar data points. But what we wanted to find out was there any, and Latvia was probably the only country we could come up with where it looked like, whatever study you looked at, and whose ever data, it was telling you a story of a relatively healthy entrepreneurial ecosystem. But the problem is that the majority of them were more like this, like the data we had from Pakistan, where we turned around and realized that there was very little consistency. There was very little coming out of that. So the reason I don't want to focus too much on this is actually at the Kauffman Foundation we produced this report. You can find it on our website. Apparently we hid it, but it's a hugely downloaded report over the last few weeks. But our research and policy department is kind of like, well, we said we would do this and we've done it and we put it on the website, but it's not prominent. You can't find it very easily. Part of the reason for that is we're concerned about sending the wrong message, that actually we know a lot because we don't know very much. And to the people doing these studies, that's not something that they necessarily agree with us on, or that they're necessarily happy that we're saying. But I think one of the things we're trying to come back and say is that we have to spend more time better understanding exactly what it is that both drives, what are the rates of new firm formation, and what are the primary barriers to new firm formation. So, for example, we were able at the Kauffman Foundation in the United States to do a substantial amount of work on this, and we started with a pile of research that we'd commissioned as high as this podium from the ground, and then we broke it down into a book called Rules for Growth. And then we took the book from Rules to Growth and we started to have a conversation at the request of our Congress. And so we whittled it down to a little, like 10-page, we dumbed it down for the politicians and, summarized it and effectively, in fact, they even said you need a briefer one, so I actually brought a copy with me, and this is the Startup Act, and it actually goes all the way down to here, and you'll see there's 5 things on here, okay? So to you serious researchers in the room, I have to tell you, I'm more of the policy guy, and we have serious economists on our team that do the research. But this is what us policy guys have to end up doing: is walking into congressional offices and saying, "Well, let me walk you through it, okay?" But it's interesting because these 5 things that the United States happened to come up with, which were the 5 biggest barriers to breaking, to helping new and young firm formation, ended up being not one of those issues was on any agenda of our own ministries of commerce, in the sense of the Department of Commerce in the United States and our Small Business Administration. Not one of those issues, which only goes to show you that the agenda that you would have to help new and young and high growth firms is likely in other countries to also be different. But you can't decide what those issues are by looking at other countries. You can only decide what those issues are by looking at your own data. And so for us, the big message is we have to figure out what we should be measuring, but we've each got to do a better job at measuring it. So for example, in the United States, the #1 challenge to the creation of more entrepreneurs, in our view, and certainly the one that's recognized in all of the versions of the Startup Act that have been now in Washington these last couple of years, was high-skilled immigration and the absence of an ability of, because in the United States we have this unique situation that we have people from all over the world that come to our universities, sometimes the smartest people in the world, and they get their PhD in molecular science, and they have some ideas about some fantastic new innovation or firm that they want to form. And if they try to form it while they're still getting their PhD, they'll actually get put in jail. But if they try to start a company after completing their education that they had a visa for, they get kicked out of the country. So, I mean, it's nonsensical when you've got many other countries in the world obviously recruiting high-skilled immigrants. Even in Chile, for example, as you know, they actually will pay entrepreneurs through their Startup Chile program to come and live in Santiago for a year, and they'll pay you $40,000, and you can come and start your company there, and you don't have to give the $40,000 back. So there is a very so in the case of the United States, there was a very strange dynamic going on that we realized that these were new issues, and I just gave you an example of one in terms of high-skilled immigration. We've got some other issues to do with excuse me, technology transfer, and we have some other issues to do with tax policy and capital gains. But the issues we picked ultimately were ones that we felt were unique to the United States. But what that has done, as far as the rest of the world is concerned, is it has. I'm going to come back to these scorecards in a minute. But what it has done is it's fostered this, which is a lot of experimentation going on about what are the regulatory and policy levers we should pull that would help us to. That would help us to remove the primary barriers to the advancement of high-growth entrepreneurs. So here are a couple of the examples. One I already picked from the United States just because I think it is evident in some other countries, but the idea of how do you allow for the freer movement of high-skilled entrepreneurs around the globe. Clearly, when I go to these startup communities, it's evident to me, we actually bring them all together in March at one Congress that we do in a different country every year. Next March, it's going to be in Moscow in Russia, and you're all welcome to come. It's free of charge. We bring 3,000 enthusiasts in the startup space. And they come together, whether they're policymakers or entrepreneurs, or whether they're people that run things like Startup Weekend or the kind of programs that help entrepreneurs. And one of the things I tell them is I could get all of you to leave your passport at the door, pick another one up on your way out, and you'd fit right back in wherever I sent you. You have this sort of common, we call it the democratization of entrepreneurship. It's become a common global culture. And so one of the things that we recognize is that when I talk to these entrepreneurs, they don't think twice about whether, there was one guy I met the other day who was in New Zealand. He'd started a coffee shop there because he read the Doing Business study of the World Bank that said that it was very easy to start a business in New Zealand. And he was Israeli, never been outside Israel, but he just figured, I don't have any money, but I want to pay these really great grad students at the University of Auckland to do they were developers, and they were really wanting to help him develop a product. He'd never been to Silicon Valley, but he actually already had customers in Silicon Valley. So this guy didn't think anything twice about going to New Zealand, opening a coffee shop for which in the back room he had computer monitors set up, and people sitting there programming about developing a product that he's going to sell in California. And he was like 24 years old. He didn't think anything of that. So I think the idea of people being able to move around the planet quite easily is one that we don't think about. What we think about is what are the barriers to our own citizens, to foreign citizens coming into our country. Or we think about the visas that people have to go other places. But we don't think about the fact that what we really need to be doing is in fostering this free flow of talent around the world. And I think the United States is much to blame for that because they have a problem that so many people want to come to the United States. But I think it's most certainly evident. There's a lot of experimenting going on with that. And certainly in your own country and in our country, we're looking at innovative models of financing. Hopefully we can talk about this in the panel. As you know, it's taken a long time in the United States. The president passed the only piece of legislation he signed in the Rose Garden in the heat of the election was interesting because you had President Obama in his speech say this in the heat of the election, like 3 months out from the election. He said, all the net new jobs over the past 25 years have come from firms less than 5 years old. And his Republican opponent on the same day said, all the net new jobs over the past 25 years have come from firms less than 5 years old. And so it turned out that entrepreneurship was not a political issue in that very political campaign. It turned out that there was an agreement over the fact that there was a special value in policies that would help new and young firms. And so I certainly think that he passed legislation in an election year, which has, it's taken them a long time to write the rules at our Securities and Exchange Commission, but essentially what it's done is it's enabled the, individual American to invest in, it's essentially released the regulations on crowdfunding. So it's allowed individual investors to be able to invest in new enterprises. There are some restrictions which I can go into if people are interested, but some of these things. So there's some of the other experimentation that's going on. We've got some around payroll tax holidays for firms that are less than 5 years old in some countries. We've got policies to move innovations out of universities into the marketplace faster. And this is very important in a lot of countries. There's a lot of issues around rule of law issues around corruption, intellectual property protection. These are less issues, for example, in some of the developed Western economies, and they're bigger issues in other countries. So we can talk about some of these experimentation things in the panel, but from a policy perspective, what I think is really interesting is that governments are really trying in a more sincere way to help new firms, and there's a substantial amount of experimentation going on. In the limited time I got left, let me just mention a couple of points. First of all, we've seen an explosion of programs, and if there's one message I try to give to Ankara, while I'm here in Ankara, is it's not about handing out grants to entrepreneurs. And it's not about funding programs. I hate to say this because I'm sure there's people in the room that want their program funded by the government. But the reality is that we've seen an explosion of programs. There are plenty of them. There are tons and tons of entrepreneurs trying to create programs for other entrepreneurs. And whenever we survey entrepreneurs and we ask them, how do we help you in the private sector? They will say, what you can do, even in the private sector now, is get out of the way. I don't need any more things. I've got all this information at my fingertips. What I need is to be left in the room with other entrepreneurs. What entrepreneurs want is peer, and startups, is they want peer-to-peer learning experiences. And so from a government perspective, I get asked this. I've testified several times on Capitol Hill to this effect. The Senate, every year, the Senate Small Business and Entrepreneurship Committee says, well, how much money do you think we should be putting into technical assistance programs as opposed to looking at regulatory policy levers and other things? And I turn around and say, you really don't need to be funding these programs. I'm sure the recipients of the programs would rather have the money, but the point is there's so much out there. In fact, our problem, we think the real threat to the continued success of this entrepreneurial revolution that, who's against entrepreneurship? I think we won the war, okay? So now the question is, how do we do it better? And so now if you really want to put money into this, put it into figuring out how do you have better data, what data are you collecting, how do you analyze which interventions to help entrepreneurs are effective and which are not, how do you map the ecosystems that are supporting all these entrepreneurs. And so I really think that this has become the dominant driver of what we think is the challenge in 2014 and onwards, which is ultimately the work that people like you can be more involved in, which is better understanding the economic science behind entrepreneurship. We're doing a couple of things that I'll just mention quickly before I wrap up. One is, and we'll put, certainly we know that we're having our first conversation with the most important organization here, which is TEPAV, but we have formed essentially a global entrepreneurship research network. And we've got together some primary foundations in the World Bank and the Kauffman Foundation. And what we're not doing is we're not pooling our money, but we're all entities that pay for economic research. And so what we're doing is we're trying to align our research methodologies to collaborate and have more cohesion about what data we're collecting and what we're measuring and analyzing. And obviously the mission is to fulfill this challenge of trying to have stronger data and stronger, more robust, data-driven policy making. And that's certainly something that we'll welcome to have participation from Turkey if there's interest in doing that. The good news about this is we realized when we tried to work with the World Bank, the Kauffman Foundation, we were trying to send money to the World Bank. The World Bank was trying to give us money. It became too complicated. We spent 2 years trying to work out the administrative logistics. So we said the first rule of this coalition will be we're not going to give each other any money, okay? We're just going to spend our own money. But we will sit around the table and talk about how we spend our money. And I think that'll be partly the success of it. The other thing we're doing is in about 40 or 50 countries we've now identified, and it's really, really hard to do, by the way, but we've identified who the policy advisor is for startups. Now you'd think that that wouldn't be very hard, but it's very, very hard. So we're starting to put together a network of the people who care about these, this field. And we will bring all of these researchers and policymakers together for our Congress, which, as I mentioned to you, happens in Moscow. The other thing I just want to mention before I wrap up is, and I think if you could put it back on Showtime, sorry, I clicked past it, is that we did put out this morning or yesterday a survey of entrepreneurs in the countries that participate in Global Entrepreneurship Week. You know, what we were trying to ask them is this simple question of how positive this environment is. You can certainly look at the results of that survey if you're interested in it, but we would welcome your thoughts and reactions to it. But essentially, most entrepreneurs are viewing that there has been a big change in the last couple of years to how favorable they are being perceived by governments. So there's more of an effort by policymakers to reach out and help entrepreneurs, I think, than there has been in the past. The challenge we have is that too much of the help is coming in the form of government-driven programs rather than looking at some of the very distinctive challenges they face when they're actually birthing a new company and making it possible. So with that, I will conclude with essentially thanking you all for being here. I know we're going to have a discussion about a variety of these areas. My focus is more on figuring out exactly what are the kinds of policy experiments we should be doing. I'm glad that we're going to have a conversation about what's happening here in Turkey. I've heard about the fund of funds and I've heard about the angel capital efforts, but I'll be interested to hear, and I hope as I can just throw it out as my first question for our discussions that go on, I'm hoping to hear about what some of the other barriers might be for high growth entrepreneurs in Turkey and whether there's any ideas that might go into any of your commission and the views of this room, people in this room about what should be the attention of policymakers. And I would hope that perhaps out of that question, there are some things which are not traditional policy issues, as we discovered in the United States, are in the current government agencies. So many, many thanks, and thank you for having me here today. So.